The plague, or as some prefer to call it, the Black Death, one of the most terrifying pandemics in human history. But here's the real question: could you have survived? In this video, we're diving deep into the brutal reality of the 14th century, uncovering who survived and why. Would your habits, your social status, or even your genetics have given you a fighting chance? Or would you have been just another victim of the plague? So stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know whether you would have made it or if the odds were stacked against you from the start. Well, here we are, the year 1347. Now imagine a world without TikTok, where the biggest drama wasn't a viral dance, but, well, the literal end of days. And it arrived not with a bang, but with a fleet of 12 rather grim-looking ships pulling into a Sicilian port. Picture this: sun-drenched docks, the usual hustle and bustle, but something's, well, kind of off. Instead of sailors tossing ropes and shouting greetings, there's an eerie silence. And then the horror unfolds. The ships aren't carrying spices or silks, but something much more sinister: death. Sailors slumped and motionless or writhing in agony, their skin marred by those telltale black boils. Now, the Sicilian authorities weren't exactly epidemiologists. They were, however, quite good at spotting a bad omen. They looked at those ships, those festering boils, and probably thought, nope, not today thank you. They did what any sensible and terrified official would do. They told those ships to basically go away and take your, well, issues with you. Unfortunately, plagues don't really respect maritime law. They're not bothered by no trespassing signs. The ships sent packing were like mobile plague dispensers, scattering their deadly cargo along the Mediterranean coast. And even before those ships were turned away, the damage was done. The plague, like a sneaky gatecrasher, had already slipped past security and was mingling with the crowd. It's a bit like trying to contain a glitter bomb in a wind tunnel. Once it's out, it's everywhere. And so the Black Death, carried by fleas on rats and amplified by the close proximity of people in medieval cities, began its grim march across Europe. Those 12 ships, those poor infected sailors, they were the grim harbingers of a catastrophe that would change the course of history. A real oops, we unleashed a monster moment. And all because someone decided a few ships looked a little bit suspect. So, on to the depressing part. We're talking about the Black Death here. Imagine a third of your friends, family and neighbours just, well, gone. That's the conservative estimate for Europe's population loss. A third. That's like if every third person you saw walking down the street suddenly vanished. Now, crack that up a notch or two or even three. Some historians, those who really like to bring the mood down, suggest the death toll was closer to 50 to 70 million in Europe alone. That's a lot of empty chairs at the medieval dinner table. But wait, there's more. There was a global tide of mortality. So what was the worldwide death toll? Well, this was an estimated 155 to 200 million. That's nearly half the world's population at the time. Let's have a look at the cities. Well, you just wouldn't want to be in one. Florence, a bustling hub of art and commerce, was hit for 6 by the plague with a reported 90% mortality rate. Imagine walking through a city where nearly everyone you knew was gone. Just dead bodies all around rotting. And then there were the villages, those quaint little hamlets that dotted the landscape. They weren't spared either. Entire communities were wiped out, leaving behind ghost towns, silent and empty. They became medieval time capsules buried under overgrown fields and forgotten by time. It wasn't until centuries later, with the advent of aerial photography, that these lost villages were rediscovered like forgotten relics of a world turned upside down. It's a chilling reminder of just how fragile life can be and how quickly things can change. One minute you're living in your best medieval life, the next you're a statistic in a plague-induced population crash. So, next time you're complaining about having a bad day or the troubles that seem to be prevailing in the world at the moment, just remember, at least you're not living through the Black Death. Let's move on to the gruesome world of Black Death symptoms, shall we? Imagine you're living in the 14th century and suddenly you notice a weird lump. Not just any lump, mind you, but a rapidly swelling lymph node. Think golf ball meets angry wasp's nest. And you're halfway there. These weren't your average run-of-the-mill bumps. They were the heralds of doom, the opening act of a very unpleasant experience. Then things would get really interesting. Those swollen lymph nodes, or buboes as they were charmingly called, would morph into black, pus-filled boils. Picture a ripe blackberry, but instead of sweet juice, it's filled with, well, I'm sure you can guess. These boils were the plague's calling card. If you developed these, you knew it would be curtains. But, sadly to say, there's more. Because that's when the full-blown symphony of misery would commence. Victims would be hit with a severe fever and then chills that would make you think you were in the Arctic. And then there would be the accompanying intense pain, as if all of this wouldn't be bad enough. Throw in the severe sweating and diarrhoea and you would then have yourself a case of full-blown plague. Then of course would quickly come the grand finale. Yes, death. One thing about the plague, it didn't hang around and make you suffer too long. A rapid death would have been the order of the day. So, who were the villains of the piece? Well, the animals of course. We're talking rats, fleas and even those pesky human lice. Let's start with the classic scapegoat, the rat. Those furry little chaps, particularly the urban variety, received seriously bad press, and fair enough really. They were the perfect plague delivery system, scurrying through crowded cities, carrying their tiny bloodthirsty passengers, fleas. Those fleas, with their insatiable appetite for blood, were like miniature vampires, hopping from rat to human, spreading the plague with every bite. But, like any good historical mystery, there's a plot twist. Some scientists, those historical detectives, argue that human fleas and lice were the real masterminds behind the pandemic. They point out that human fleas and lice are, well, rather fond of humans. And they were everywhere, in the clothes, the bedding, the hair. It's like the plague decided to hitch a ride on the most readily available transport. And then there were the ships, those floating plague palaces. Imagine a wooden vessel crammed with cargo, humans and of course a thriving rat and flea community. These ships were like mobile plague incubators, sailing along trade routes, dropping off their deadly cargo at every port. But it wasn't just humans who suffered. Livestock also got a taste of the plague's wrath. Sheep, cows and other animals succumbed to the disease, leading to widespread shortages. It was also, of course, a serious blow to the economy. The plague wasn't just killing people, it was disrupting the entire ecosystem. So next time you see a rat or a flea, give them a little nod of respect, from a safe distance of course. They played a pivotal role in one of history's most devastating events. And remember, even the smallest creatures can have a big impact. It's a lesson we can all learn from. So if the Black Death wasn't enough, it seems it might have brought a few invited guests along with it. Turns out those mass graves weren't just a testament to the sheer scale of the bubonic plague's devastation. They were also a bit of a historical treasure trove, revealing some rather unwelcome surprises, namely anthrax spores. Now, anthrax isn't exactly man's best friend either. The discovery of these spores suggests that the Black Death might have been a multi-disease event. The plague and anthrax, there'd be no surviving that. What makes anthrax particularly troublesome is its rather intimate method of transmission. It spreads through sweat, saliva, tears, and even skin contact. So while people were desperately trying to avoid those telltale black boils, they might have been unwittingly spreading another deadly disease through everyday interactions. This revelation complicates the whole Black Death narrative. It wasn't just fleas and rats, it was a cocktail of horrors, a perfect storm of pathogens if you like. It makes you wonder, how much worse did this make the already catastrophic situation of the plague? Medieval medicine, a time of bold theories and even bolder, well, let's call them treatment choices. When the Black Death hit, doctors were basically throwing their full arsenal of weaponry at it in the hope that something would stick and save the day. First up, we have bloodletting, the medieval equivalent of hitting a reset on the human body. The idea was that the plague was caused by an imbalance of bodily fluids, and the solution? Let some of that fluid out. What could possibly go wrong? Well, turns out quite a lot. Draining a patient already weakened by the plague often just sped up their journey to the afterlife. It's like trying to put out a fire with a drop of gasoline. Then there was boil lancing. Doctors in their infinite wisdom thought that popping those pus-filled boils would release the bad stuff. Instead, of course, they just spread the contagious material around, turning every patient into a walking biohazard. Now here's a remedy that may just surprise you: aromatherapy. Yes, burning herbs and immersing oneself in vinegar or rosewater were popular remedies. The thinking was, if it smells nice, well, it must be good for you. Sadly though, the plague wasn't impressed by a well-scented room. It was like trying to ward off a hurricane with a scented candle. To top it all off, many doctors and priests, those who were supposed to be the pillars of society, decided that self-preservation was the best policy. They abandoned their duties, leaving the sick and dying to fend for themselves, resulting in somewhat of a medical and moral meltdown. Now what about the plague doctors themselves? They, more than most, were at risk. So let's take a look at the plague doctors' PPE. Yes, the get-up that made them look like something out of a gothic horror film. They'd wear a waxed fabric gown, gloves, boots and a hat, all designed to keep them completely covered. So far, so good. They'd also carry a stick to examine patients without getting a little too close, and to, well, prod them if needed. It was a full-body hazmat suit, way before hazmat suits were in vogue or even invented. Now what about that ever so weird looking mask with the spooky beak? Imagine trying to treat a disease that everyone thought was caused by bad air. Basically, they believed sickness wafted around like a particularly unpleasant perfume. So what's a doctor to do then? Enter the beak. That long bird-like nose wasn't for show. It was in fact a sort of respirator. Inside they'd stuff all manner of things: herbs, spices, dried flowers and even sponges soaked in vinegar. This was all aimed at filtering out the nasty bad air that surrounded the patient. Rosemary, lavender, mint, camphor, you name it, they probably shoved it in there. It must have smelt, well, interesting to say the least. So while they may have looked quite frightening, at the end of the day, They were just trying to survive and help others do the same. As with all pandemics, their demise is usually swift. So what were the few factors that contributed to the plague's eventual demise? Firstly, the sheer unadulterated carnage that the Black Death inflicted led to its own downfall. It was a ruthless host, and it didn't hang about decimating the crowd. The mortality rate was so astronomically high, with over 80% of infected individuals succumbing within a week, that the plague basically ran out of people to infect. It's a grimly efficient form of population control. Deadly diseases, in their own twisted way, often sabotage their own success by wiping out their host. It's like a fire that burns so hot it consumes all the fuel quickly and then fizzles out. In this case, the fuel was, well, us. Then we have the medieval version of social distancing, quarantine. People, understandably, started to get a bit twitchy about close contact. Cities, in a rare moment of proactive governance, implemented quarantines. Venice, ever the trendsetter, introduced the Trentino, requiring sailors to remain on their ships for 30 days. They later upped the ante to 40 days, which is where we get the term quarantine from. Life in the cities became a surreal dystopian drama. Shops closed, priests decided that delivering last rites wasn't worth the risk, understandable I guess, and cremation became the new normal. And in a move that highlights the desperation of the times, people started abandoning infected family members. It was a brutal survival instinct, a grim reminder that when push came to shove, it was every man for himself. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. People started to get their act together, hygiene-wise. European cities, perhaps realising that living in filth wasn't the best idea, started to adopt better sanitation practices. It's like they finally realised that a clean city is a happy city and a less plague-ridden one. Personal hygiene also improved, leading to fewer flea infestations. And then there's the evolutionary angle. The Black Death, it turns out, wasn't a one-hit wonder. DNA analysis of victims revealed that the bacteria was once a supercharged, ultra-lethal version of itself. Over time, it evolved to become less deadly, which, ironically, increased its chances of survival. It's like the plague decided to play the long game. It's a classic case of natural selection. The less lethal strains were, the more likely they were to spread. The name of the game was not to kill the host quite as quickly. There's also a fascinating theory about human genetic evolution. A mutation in human DNA, which also happens to provide some resistance to HIV, may have given some individuals a fighting chance against the plague. These lucky folks survived and passed on their resistant genes, gradually changing the human population. So, the Black Death didn't just disappear overnight. It was a combination of factors: the plague running out of victims, people taking precautions, improved hygiene, and the evolution of both the bacteria and the human population. It was a grim chapter in history, but it also showed the resilience of humanity and the power of adaptation. Okay, so let's fast forward a few centuries. The Black Death is, believe it or not, still kicking around, but thankfully it's lost a lot of its swagger. It's like those ageing rock bands from years ago who still play the old hits, but with a little less intensity. Yes, the plague still exists, but the good news is we have antibiotics. It's like bringing a bazooka to a bare knuckle fight. A few pills and boom, the plague is sent packing. So no more bloodletting for you. But even though we can treat it now, the Black Death left a massive indelible mark on history. It wasn't just a blip, it was a seismic shift that reshaped European society, economy and even our genes. Imagine a world where a third or possibly more of the population is gone. Lots of abandoned farms and hamlets, together with the economic disruption. The plague's impact wasn't just about death, it was about change. Labour shortages led to higher wages for surviving workers, which, believe it or not, was a good thing for some. It kind of forced a change in the social structure. In a somewhat weird way, it was a dark catalyst for some positive changes. And, as we've seen earlier, it even altered our genetic makeup, leaving us with mutations that might protect us from other diseases. Something of a silver lining at least. Now the big question, could it happen again? Could we face a pandemic on the scale of the Black Death? Well, who knows? We live in a world that's more interconnected than ever before. Look at the pandemic we have all just navigated through. People and goods travel at lightning speed, which is great for global trade, but not so great for containing infectious diseases. It's like we've built the perfect superhighway for pandemics. So, the Black Death serves as a stark reminder of our vulnerability. It's a cautionary tale, a history lesson with a really scary plot. It forces us to think about how we can prepare for future pandemics, how we can improve our healthcare systems, and how we can work together to protect ourselves. Mind you, if we haven't learned anything from the last pandemic, we never will. It's like a cosmic nudge reminding us that even in our modern world, we're not immune to the forces of nature. And I guess it wouldn't really hurt to wash our hands a little more often, just in case. Well, thanks for watching yet another episode from History's Life Stories. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. Take care, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.